Today we'll be covering the beginner's guide to latte art. What you need to know, what you need to understand, what you need to practice to be able to pour what I would consider the three key patterns of latte art. That would be a heart, a Rosetta, and a tulip. This is not really going to cover what we call etching, which is kind of drawing pictures on the top of coffee. This is just classic free pour latte art. It's going to require some practice, and the way we're going to approach this is that first of all, we're going to talk about getting set up for success. That's going to be the milk, how you steam it, how you prep it, what you pour it from, all of that stuff. And then we'll move into some techniques to practice. There are two at the start that apply to everything, and then we'll move into individual patterns, each time adding one more little technique to practice to create that pattern. And at the end, what we'll also cover is kind of diagnosing your own pours to see what you can focus on and how you can make them better. We'll look at a few images of kind of classic pours that maybe need some work to understand, oh, okay, it's this I need to focus on, that I need to practice to get where I want to go. This video is sponsored by Shopify, and because of that, we're going to give away a bunch of coffee to people who maybe want something to practice with, so keep an eye out for that. Now, despite the fact that I did once place 5th in the World Latte Art Championship, entirely undeserved, I'm not the world's greatest latte artist. I'm not the best of the best. And I don't intend to abuse the quote any further, which is those who can do, those who can't teach, because that's used all wrong all the time. But I do feel like I can teach something useful, dispel some myths, and really add something that I don't see a lot of online, because I've taught a lot of people to pour latte art, and I think there's some really key stuff to focus on and hopefully explain really clearly. If you are looking for something more advanced at the end of this, if you've mastered it all, we'll leave you some links and resources down in the description below. People like Emily Bryant or Lance Hedrick, both very accomplished, very talented, but plenty of other folks online who you should be checking out. Final thing before we get going, if you haven't seen the video that we made about how to steam great milk, that would be a great place to start. We will presume you've seen it and understand it in talking about some of this stuff. So if you haven't checked that out and your milk texture isn't where you want it to be, there's a link down in the description below. Go check it out right now. Where I want to start today is by talking about foam, because this is the defining factor of the milk that we steam, that it is foamy. We've added air, we've created bubbles, and to pour latte art, we need those bubbles. That foam is going to do all of the work for us when we paint. If you don't add any foam to milk, you can't pour latte art with that milk. That's important to understand. Now, the amount of air that you add is part of the steaming process, and it'll have a couple of impacts. Historically, we thought about it from a drink perspective, in that if I want a stronger coffee taste, if I add more air to create more foam, when I pour that into the cup, there'll be less milk, there'll be more foam in that final cup, and therefore the drink will be stronger. So drinks like a cappuccino had thicker foam than something like a flat white. That was a defining aspect of it. I want to think about foam in another way as well. You'll steam some milk, you'll pop that jug down on the counter and you'll swirl it around. This is really important because you need to whip the liquid milk up into the foam so that it's heavy and glossy and can be poured out. If you do not mix your liquid milk and your foam together, the foam will always kind of sit back from the edge of the pitcher and just will allow the liquid milk underneath to pour out. That means no latte art or a glob of kind of dry foam at the end of it. Those things are bad. But as you look at that milk swirl in the pitcher, you'll be able to see how much air you've added in a way, from the way that the milk moves. And that's going to tell you, and there's going to be a lot of art analogies here, what kind of a paintbrush you have for your picture. Yes, we've gone full subtlety. These are actual paintbrushes. Now, if you consider your cup to be your canvas where you're going to be painting a picture, if you want to paint something intricate and very pretty and complex, having a big brush is going to make that very difficult. Same thing, if you've got a lot of foam in your milk, it's going to be difficult to pour a complex picture with it, a complex pattern. If you have less foam, but still some, you can probably pour something a little bit more intricate, paint a more delicate pattern. This is a mixture of trial and error as you learn to steam milk. You look at your pitcher as you start to steam, you make sure you sort of stretch that milk in the early phase enough, but not too much to get what you want. But ultimately, you can steam your milk, look at it move, and then understand that, okay, I've added a bit too much foam. I could throw some milk away, get rid of it, but I don't want to do that, it's wasteful. I'm going to be constrained in what I can pour because this is a thicker, moussier milk. I would rather you just poured a drink that didn't look beautiful than wasted something you'd paid for. It's really easy, coming from a kind of professional coffee world, to kind of consider waste acceptable in the learning of latte art, which is inevitable in places like cafes, but at home, I don't think it is. I think you should make a delicious drink that maybe doesn't look perfect, rather than worrying overly about everything being just the way that you want it to be. With time, with practice, you'll get where you want to go, but it's okay that there are a lot of very delicious, very ugly mistakes along the way. Now, when it comes to foam, one of the key characteristics is going to be the milk itself. Now, consider this brand agnostic. It's not really the point here to talk about one particular brand. We've got whole milk, skim milk, and a dairy alternative here. If you are sourcing alternative milk, do get one specifically designed for coffee, labeled as being suitable for coffee. Otherwise, it may not steam particularly well because it's not designed to do so. Now, with these milks, there are a couple of things to think about that will affect how easy they are to pour. As I said, before you pour, you need to spin together the milk and the foam until that pitcher looks very, very glossy from the top. The rate at which that milk separates out, that it drains from the foam, will impact how easy it is to pour with. Whole milk is thicker and drains slower than skim milk, as an example. So if you want to work with skim, you have to be much quicker and less ambitious overall in what you can pour with it, because that will dry out much faster. When it's dry, you just can't work with it the same way. Whole milk will stay glossy for longer, will remain pourable for longer, and generally, you'll see in dairy alternatives designed for coffee, they will drain sort of in between, relatively slowly but not quite as slow as whole milks. Another key factor in drainage is going to be temperature. Look, I don't like the word drainage, but I can't think of a better one. Ultimately, the hotter your milk is, the faster the foam in the milk will separate again. In all of these things, you need to balance your experience visually as well as from a taste point of view. What might be the easiest to work with is actually relatively cool milk. You'll see people pour very complex patterns on the internet that seem to take a really long time, and that milk somehow stays glossy the whole time. Often they're pouring with cooler milk than you would want to drink and enjoy at home. It's designed mostly to pour beautiful drinks, not delicious drinks. This is important to consider if you at home just want to make a drink you want to enjoy, but also pour a pattern on top. Just understand that going really, really hot will make it very hard, if not impossible. Really, really cold will be easier, but just less delicious. The only other thing to consider with temperature is when you're steaming, especially with dairy alternatives that are shelf-stable at ambient temperatures, the colder you start with, obviously not frozen, but fridge cold ideally, the more time you will have to do your sort of air addition stretching phase and then that long rolling churning phase before you're finished. So it's easier ultimately to start with colder milk. Two more key things before we get into actually pouring some latte art. Firstly is how you're creating your steamed milk. Most of this video is based on the idea that you have some sort of espresso machine with a steam wand, but that is not absolutely necessary. There are a variety of options out there right now. You do have things like this, which are sort of automatic frothers. You put cold milk in, these heat it and foam it at the same time. The challenge with these ultimately is that you have limited control over the sort of amount of air that you're going to add. It's a sort of semi-automated process. In most cases, the more milk you put in to start with, the less foam it will add, because it will work to a sort of fixed max height. That can become quite wasteful though if it's a lot more milk than you need. There are these days better and better handheld options, things like the nano foamer and other things like that. You start with hot milk and again you go through this process. I've seen excellent results from handheld whisks these days. As long as you focus on the two stages of the technique, a focus on adding air at the start and on churning and rolling the milk in the second half, very pourable milk for great latte art. Ultimately though, at the end of it, you're going to put that milk in a pitcher, swirl it, look at it, make sure it's glossy, and understand the texture and the nature of the brush that you're working with. If you are working with steam, probably from an espresso machine, though you can get little stovetop steamers that work very well indeed too, we need to talk about steaming tips. This is essentially the number of holes in the little tip that sits on the end of the wand. The number of holes dictates how much steam can get out, because the more steam that comes out of the wand, the faster the process will be. I would say for most people steaming at home, having less holes in the tip is much easier than having more holes. In a cafe environment, you need the speed, and you'll often see sort of 4-hole tips that allow a lot of steam out, and steaming is done in 10 to 12 seconds. At home, spending 30 seconds to accomplish the same thing just gives you more time. It makes it a little less knife edge, allows you to be more precise. It's just easier. So if you are struggling with how quickly it's happening at home, have a look at an alternative tip, maybe 1 or 2 holes, see if it slows things down for you, allows you to practice. They're not very expensive, they're very easy to change. The first aspect of technique I want to talk about is what I would call pour height. That is the distance from the spout of the pitcher to the liquid coffee in the cup down below. You must control this in order to paint with the milk. Here's the thing. In this jug, there's obviously nothing, but theoretically in this jug is milk and foam, and you're going to whisk them together so that you're able to pour the milk and the foam together. But the foam is what we're really painting with. At the start, as we pour, we want that milk and foam to fall into the coffee and be stained by the coffee. That requires that the milk is falling fast enough that it's sort of dragged under the surface, and that foam, even though it's buoyant and wants to float, also is dragged under the surface. The more you do that, the sort of fuller your cup will get with a nice canvas of brown-coloured milk foam. Important caveat here. People will talk about lifting the crema on the espresso. It's not the crema. You're really just lifting up dyed brown milk foam. You can pour beautiful latte art with coffee with no crema whatsoever. In fact, I would recommend most of the time giving the cup a little swirl to further break down the crema before you pour into it. You'll know from drinking espresso or seeing espresso that crema falls apart over time. It's not a long-lasting foam. Getting rid of it is kind of useful before you lift some up literally on top of the milk foam. If you don't kind of swirl or mix the crema away, you can get a little raft of crema that sits on the top of the milk foam and causes that to break down. You'll see rapid, big, ugly bubbles forming in the finished drink, and that's often the crema, having been kind of lifted up, causing these issues. Giving it a nice swirl will break it down some more. You could stir it with a teaspoon if you want to. You could just leave it till it's gone. It'll just be easier and prettier to work with. You can skim it off. It's a lot of work, not much benefit, but crema is in no way required. We're really just working with milk foam, either dyed brown from pouring up high, or, and this is the key bit, when I pour very close, it doesn't have enough speed, velocity to fall into the coffee, and it will sit neatly on top, and it will go bright white. And that's what we want. We want to control the height to control the color that we're producing. Further away to start, keep everything nice and brown. Suddenly much closer, nice, crisp, bright white. All right, now I've got some actual coffee, which is nice. I'll just give it a little swirl, as I said, to get rid of as much crema as I can. So what I want to illustrate here is the speed of transition as you go from higher up, which is only really this high. You want to stay high and then suddenly get close. And that's what will give you contrast between the brown and the white. That's what we're chasing here. Really nice contrast, crisp definition between the brown of the foam and the white of the picture that you're going to pour. And that's just moving from high to low relatively quickly. How high is high, you might ask? That's a good question. Well, often to start with, you'll pour naturally a little closer. You don't want to make a big splash by pouring from very high and smacking milk into the coffee. And there may be, as you initially start to pour, a little bit of white that does sit on the surface. You can cheat and keep pouring from high and pour over it, and the speed of the milk will actually pull it under the surface, dye it nice coffee colored, and lift it back up again. You want to pour from a little bit higher if milk is foamier because it's ultimately more buoyant, but it's not a massive difference. Generally speaking, it's going to be what, 10, 12 centimeters, coming down then as close as you can get. For that reason, I quite like pouring from bigger jugs, like this one. Not just because my hands are large and the little jugs are difficult, but if you take a jug like this with less milk in it, you have to pour it further to bring the spout further forwards, closer to the surface of the coffee, in order to have milk come out. If I have a jug like this, which is going to be fuller, well, I have less of an angle as I pour to get the milk out, which means this will always stay further away from the coffee, which will make contrast a little bit more difficult. It's not insurmountable, but for me, it helps to pour from a slightly larger jug than to pour from a slightly smaller jug. You'll see people pour incredible things from small jugs. I'm just saying this is, for a beginner, an easier place to start. Now, before we move on from pour height into the next aspect of the technique, I want to touch briefly on what happens if you get pour height wrong. And it's what I call the beige problem. Often people will take too long to transition from far away to very close, and they'll live in a kind of grey zone in the middle. Sorry, that should be the beige zone in the middle. When you're neither very close nor very far away, you'll get a kind of intermediate color. It's not quite dark brown, it's not quite bright white, it's that kind of beige color you'll see. That takes away your contrast. And so if you find yourself with beige in your pattern, you know that you weren't close enough, or you weren't far enough away, or you took too long to transition between those two. The next technique I want to talk about is ultimately pour speed. This is difficult, but it's really at what angle are you pouring the milk in? How quickly is it coming out of the pitcher into the cup? This is one of the things that beginners often find difficult to control, primarily because they're worried about making a mess. And I want to say now, early on in practicing this, practice in a place where you can make a mess and feel okay about it. You can spill, you can get coffee and milk on your surfaces. That should be okay. It's really helpful to overcome certain aspects of technique, to just know that you can make a mess. Ideally, as you pour and you begin to pour your pattern, you should be pouring fast enough that the milk is flowing away, forwards from the pitcher. If you pour very slowly, very gently, that milk only has sort of vertical momentum and it will fall straight down, and you'll start to draw on top of yourself and you'll create no full rich pattern. What you want to do is use the speed of the milk to push away whatever it is you draw and have it sort of move forwards, and that's where the shape of the cup will play a role. Cups usually, for good latte art, are round, and as the milk hits that wall, it's pushed in both directions around and it starts to spread because milk coming in behind it is sort of squishing it against the wall of the cup. Pouring fast enough is absolutely key to pouring good full cup patterns. If you pour too gently, your milk will go nowhere. You will not have a full rich thing. It'll live just in the middle of the cup. That can look nice, actually, but pouring faster, overcoming the, oh no, the cup's full, I should stop now, is so essential to a good, full, complex picture that it's worth practicing and just saying, I'm going to make a mess today. I'm going to pour too fast, and you just want to see it happen. We'll do it now. I'll just pour, keep pouring at a good speed, and I'll make a terrible mess. Now here, what I'll do is I'll end up putting the cup down flat on the surface. You'll notice that most people, when they pour, tilt the cup. This goes all the way back to pour height again. If you tilt the cup, you let the jug get closer, the sort of tip of the spout, closer to the surface of the coffee than you would do straight out like this. It's why pouring in a takeout cup, which is tall and sort of deep, is a little bit more complex than pouring in a nice wide bowl. It's just easier to get the spout nice and close. What we want to pay attention to is the way that the milk is spreading from that central point as you pour. So color in anything you don't want. We come down and pour fast enough that the milk is pushing away. As a point of contrast, let's do the same thing again, but I'll just pour too slow. I'll start high, as I did before, bring it down, and even if I pour really close, it doesn't fill the cup the same way. And you don't get the big wide thing, it just sits in the middle. It's not what we want. Some people like to pour a little bit and swirl to make sure that the coffee and the milk foam are thoroughly mixed to have a nice even canvas to pour against. I don't think it's essential. I think it can help in some cases for some people. If you like to do it, that's fine, but I've seen plenty of people pour without that. But that's what's happening. Early on, there's a few bits of white we want to get rid of. We can just pour over them, leaving us lots of space, a nice brown sort of canvas, and then down we come to just pour, pour, pour. Easy. Now for some people, just controlling those two colors, being able to pour a kind of nice circle of white surrounded by the brown of coffee, is charming and enjoyable. Some people call that a monk's head. I'm up and down on whether I really agree with that. Let's not get into it. But I think it's pleasing, and if you like the aesthetics of it and you enjoy making it, you should totally make it. But with one more little addition, we can turn it into our first pattern, which is the heart. The technique we're going to add now to create the heart is called the pull-through. Or I call it the pull-through. What we're going to do is draw a line of milk right at the end of the pour to kind of drag through to create the shape that we want and to finish the drink. To do it right, there are a couple of things to think about. It's often where a lot of people learning to pour latte art go wrong. It's a really key thing to get correct. We can use two different things here to kind of control this whole thing. We're going to go and focus once again on pour height. As we pull through at the end of the drink, we don't want to paint a thick line. So the easiest thing to do is to go back up high, further away from the drink again, for that pour through. That way, any milk we pour will fall under the surface and sort of pull through a nice, neat line. I would also recommend pulling through relatively quickly. 2 reasons. 1, it helps to sort of draw a more delicate line, and 2, actually helps draw a straighter line. If you tend to pour through quite slowly, you'll tend to have a little wiggly, wavy line through the pattern that you've just carefully painted. I was watching a David Schomer video on latte art, made many, many years ago. I was kind of amused that when he pulled through at the end, he always poured off the cup onto the saucer and the counter. And I thought that was kind of bad. And then I was reminded that actually pouring off the edge of the cup is really, really useful as a way to learn to do it quickly enough. I probably wouldn't put the saucer there, but again, if you make a little bit of a mess on your counter, don't worry about it. Let's go through and focus on the 2 key steps. So at the end of the pour, we're going to come up and then draw through relatively fast. We'll kind of run through a checklist. Milk, nice and glossy. Crema, dissipating nicely. We're going to start from high, lift up that brown canvas, pour from close, pour fast enough, and then we're going to come up and through. Doesn't matter that it hit the counter, don't care. You end up with a nice heart shape. That speed of pouring through pulls the top in, creates the point at the bottom, and you end up with a lovely, pretty heart. If you want to experiment with this pattern, then you're going to experiment with when you start to pour with crisp white foam. You can hold and hold and hold right until the end and just pour a neat little heart wherever you want it, or get a bit more ambitious and start pouring earlier, create a fuller, richer, kind of rounder shape of white that you're going to pull through right at the end. That's the kind of playground of this that makes it fun to experiment with, but it's really about getting those key techniques down. Pour height control, pour speed control, up, and then a little pour through at the end. A quick note before we get into the Rosetta on milk texture. Drinks like the cappuccino require a little bit more foam and therefore are maybe suited to patterns like the heart that work well with thicker foam. The Rosetta needs a thinner layer of foam. I would argue you can never pour a good Rosetta on a cappuccino because a cappuccino should have more foam than you can use to paint a fine, delicate pattern. It needs a thicker brush. For something like a latte or a flat white, Rosettas are, I think, a lovely pattern of choice because you're using some foam, but not too much. It's that thinner, silkier milk that you're going to pour with. Let's talk about the Rosetta. It's a classic pattern. It's actually the first one that I learned. It was the thing that I saw on the internet in 2004. And I was like, I have to learn to do that. And I downloaded these little files of people pouring latte art in like 240p. And I taught myself. And it took a long time. I digress. The Rosetta is actually incredibly similar to the heart with a kind of 1.5 small additions to it. The main addition is instead of just pouring the milk in, as you're pouring, you're going to add a gentle and small rocking motion. A lot of people think it's a big, fast rocking motion. It doesn't need to be. You can let the speed of the milk coming out of the jug do a lot of the work in this pattern in terms of creating nice wide leaves. You're going to focus on just pouring gently. Where you're going to struggle as you start is that as you start to focus on pouring side to side, you will naturally start to slow down the speed of the milk coming out of the jug. Your brain can't do those 2 things very easily. That's the fight of this one. Practicing pouring fast enough as well as getting a little wiggle going. Can't say enough how small and how relatively slow that rocking motion is. Some people will rock from the fingers, some from the wrists. It's kind of up to you what feels nice, but you just want a gentle side to side, and it's a small movement, little tick-tock rhythmical feel to it, right? It's try and stay even, try and stay slow, try and stay small. Trust me, you don't need to make this complex. Now I said this is 1.5 additional techniques. I'm not going to do the half here. I'm just going to do the wiggle as I pour. I'm not even going to pull through. I just want to show you how simple and how small that movement is while we go through all the same things we've done before. Pouring from that little bit higher up, lifting the canvas, tilting the cup, bringing it in nice and close, and just wiggling as we pour. Just wiggling, right? Now I'm going to stop there. You'll see that even though my wiggle was small, these leaves are getting wider and wider, and that's the milk coming in behind them, pushing them against the wall of the cup and causing them to spread and get bigger. Controlling that is kind of a key beginning part of a good Rosetta. Focusing on contrast and just that slow, even wiggle. Now that doesn't make a full Rosetta because when the cup gets nearly full, we want to be able to create a full cup pattern. And that means moving from the middle and slowly zigzagging our way back to the edge of the cup before coming up and adding the pull through. That little zigzag can be fast, slow, it's kind of what you feel comfortable with. It can be 1, 2, 3 up and through. But you do need to move away from the center towards the back of the cup, just right at the end. Nice and glossy. In we go, staying nice and high. Down we come, we start to wiggle straight away, wiggle, 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 coming back at the end, up and through. Let's do a bad pour to sort of highlight what we're talking about here. Here, I'll stay too close at the end, and my pour through will be with a sort of thicker pen than it should be. This will be hard to force my hand to do. This is really going to hurt me emotionally. Rock, 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 rock. That big fat line through the middle, not what we want. Stay high for that final pour through. Now there are a huge number of variants on the Rosetta. If you watch other people pour, you'll see they start at different times when maybe the cup's half full or less than half full or getting on to 2/3 full. It's going to dictate the size and fullness of the picture, the speed at which they rock, how much they drag as they're kind of rocking most of the whole thing. These will all impact the sort of shape of the leaves, the number of the leaves, but that basic technique, the thing that we're focusing on today, is really about start high, get as close as you can, and straight away, keep your pour speed steady, get your rocks coming out small, slow, and gentle and even, and you're going to be 90% of the way there. And after you've mastered that, messing around with kind of developing more complex things gets much, much easier. But these really are the fundamental basics of the pour. A key part of this whole thing is practice. It's building muscle memory. It's something that professional baristas have a massive advantage in by doing this hundreds of times every day. You don't have the same advantage at home. You can do things like steam a little bit of water with some dishwashing soap in there, a little tiny droplet that will steam a little bit like milk. It'll give you some practice there. It won't quite pour the same. You can pour it into a strong kind of concentrate of instant coffee dissolved in water. That's cheaper than good espresso. Ultimately, though, there is no substitute for the real thing. So there's a little giveaway in the description below. I'm going to give away 50 bags of coffee for espresso. If you're anywhere in the world I can ship you coffee to, you're eligible. You don't have to pay to enter, anything like that. Hopefully I can help a few people have a little bit more fun, get some practice pouring some great drinks. And that's possible thanks to this video's sponsor, which is Shopify. And here's a short ad for them now. Shopify is a commerce platform that helps you start, grow, and manage a business. And I've been through all of those phases with Shopify. Going all the way back to 2008 when we started a coffee company, we started selling online in August that year with Shopify. And we were a little tiny store. In fact, teeny tiny. I had a check. Last week, we processed more orders by about double than we did in our first year trading online. So it'll take you from the smallest beginnings through to being a substantial, busy business. And you're never going to have an issue with your website falling over. You can throw all the traffic in the world at your store and it will stand up and you won't miss a single sale. More than that, it's so easy now to build a beautiful web store. Their checkout converts incredibly well, and I've just been a massive fan of Shopify for a long, long time now. So much so that every time we want to build a new store with things like tens, hundreds, thousands, where we sell prints and limited edition merch online, well, that's all built once again on Shopify because I know it works and it works super well. You can integrate it into other platforms as necessary. It's super flexible and the reporting on the back end is excellent. If you want to give Shopify a try, then go to shopify.com/JamesHoffmann, the link's in the description, or use the QR code on screen now and that will get you a free trial. Thank you to Shopify for sponsoring this video. So our third and final pattern for the day is the Tulip. It's a fun little pattern. It's not too complex, but you can add complexity in quite a nice, easy way. There's one additional technique to learn here, which I'm going to call the push. We're going to start to pour in one place and then move our pitcher forwards before coming back and starting to pour in that place again, sort of further back in the cup. We're going to forcibly push these kind of blobs of white deeper into the cup to give us more canvas to draw into. This will make sense when you see it happening in the top down. One of the nice things about the Tulip is that it's a little bit more flexible when it comes to the foaminess of the milk you're working with. This will work with thicker foam. It will work with thinner foam too. That's the nice thing. It's closer to a heart than a Rosetta in that we're just going to be pouring sort of in the middle of the cup and letting the milk build the pattern for us. But we're going to push it forwards at the end of each little dollop and pour behind it and push into that again and again. And so as you start from high. Raise that canvas up, come down close, and a little push. And then we're going to pour in a little push and a little push and pull through. Each time you just want to be conscious that you have a little bit of a gap between the sort of last dollop of white, that little blob of white that you've poured, some brown canvas in between it that you can push into to create the separation between the leaves or the flowers of the tulip. I don't really know. It doesn't look like a tulip to me. It just looks nice. This is not the time to argue these things. With the tulip, you can add complexity by adding more leaves, I suppose. A bigger cup will help, and thinner milk, closer to, say, Rosetta style milk, will also help. But even with thicker milk, it's perfectly possible. And the earlier you start, more little dollops you can add to it. You can decide how far you want to go. Hopefully at this point you'll see where the kind of 80-20 rule of latte art comes in. If you can learn to focus on controlling, obviously, grade texture, your pour height, your sort of proximity, and then your pour speed, that's going to unlock all of these different patterns. You're going to add little bits and pieces to them. As long as your pour through is good, you'll start to get pretty things. But as you're learning, what I want to focus on next is kind of diagnosing a pour to understand what's gone wrong so that you can improve a little bit next time. Because pouring something that just doesn't look right is very frustrating if you don't know why. So I'm going to grab a laptop and some images, which people have kindly shared with me, and we'll go through a little bit of diagnosis to wrap this whole thing up. So for this section, I want to go through some pictures of latte art to give you a framework to assess your pours to decide what you need to focus on to get them to look the way you want them to look. And so for each of the images we'll look at here, we'll assess things like milk texture, the kind of silkiness, the wetness of the milk when poured, the pouring techniques, things like height, evenness of rocking motions or how it's being poured, or pour speed, pull through, all of the things we've touched on in this video. Try and pull them together, and to make sure that when you look at your pour and you're like, oh, not quite there, you know what to focus on the next time you're practicing and pouring something delicious. To get some images, I posted a thread on Reddit in the Latte Art subreddit asking people to submit some images, and also in my Discord I asked for a few images too for people who are willing to share some pours to get some feedback on them. I'll run through them pretty quickly and we'll assess, based on how they look, what could be improved and how to think about them. So, first up is a pour from Reddit. I think it's a very kind of classic pour here, Just the Average Gatsby. It's a pour where we can see a few different things to sort of focus on. Firstly, I would say the milk looks like it might have been drying out a little bit and sort of separating as it was poured. You tend to see that kind of fuzzy edged look to a pour, that sort of lack of crispness of detail. That'll come from foamier milk, but also from sort of dry milk when it's poured. You'll see that everything's bunched up a little bit and sort of up at the top of the cup there. So make sure you're pouring right in the middle, and it's a kind of pour speed issue where the patterns are not being pushed away into the cup to kind of hit that wall and spread out and kind of get bigger. So focus on a little bit more pour speed and a bit more with this tulip. Push as you start to pour, and just push that jug forward just to get it away and have more space to pour through. And then finally you'll see that the kind of pull through at the end a little bit thick. So focus on coming up a little bit higher and moving a little bit quicker. Don't be worried about making a little bit of a mess, but that will give you a more centered, a nice symmetrical pour, bit more definition. So really focus on getting that milk spun up in the jug, nice and silky and glossy before you pour. Next up, a nice little heart from Caden, again on Reddit. Here, contrast is good, great, contrast is nice, milk texture looks good. Really, it's about pour placement and sort of getting in early and pouring with enough speed. And again, it's one of the hardest things to get right, to just get a slightly fuller shape there. Pull through is pretty nice. It's really just about pouring it right in the middle of the cup when you start and making sure you pour with enough speed to sort of fill the space, fill the canvas that you have. Now, this one here from Simon Cox 01, again on Reddit, is a really interesting example of kind of pour speed being the challenge. Here, it looks like all of the pouring has happened in that kind of backwards motion that we use at the end of a Rosetta to kind of fill the cup. Here, there hasn't been enough sort of steady pouring in one space where the milk speed is pushing those leaves out and sort of making them bigger and wider. So you end up with this very narrow Rosetta. The contrast is very good. The evenness is very good. What would make this a sort of fuller, more detailed, more satisfying Rosetta is simply how fast you're pouring in that first part as you come down and start to rock out those first few leaves. That's really it. The pull through, It's a little bit sort of a thick line here, so I'd focus on just coming a little bit higher right at the end. You can see that line through the middle is a little bit, sort of, for me, a bit too obvious. Come through nice and high and nice and quick. Don't be afraid, as I say, to make a little mess and spill a little bit over the edge of the cup as you dial that in. Okay, this next one is from Punk GF, and there's a few different things I want to focus on here. Firstly, milk texture. There's a few things happened here. I can see some big bubbles. If you go back and watch the steaming video about how to steam great milk, it's important as soon as you finish steaming to put the jug down, let it sit for a second, because we're going to tap the jug after we clean the steam wand to break and pop any of those larger bubbles. Those larger bubbles have not been popped before the pour, and so you can see them on here, and we don't want them. We can just tap, tap, and then swirl, spin, 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 make sure that foam is nice and wet, full of milk to make it nice and heavy. And so that's one of the challenges here. I would say it looks like you could do just a little bit more air in there. Not much, just a little bit more and a really nice incorporation before pouring. This looks like it might have dried out a little bit too. And then it's going to be focusing on the evenness of that rock. You can see that it's kind of clustered up. The leaves have kind of poured on top of each other. And that's happened when the pour speed has been a bit too slow, that it hasn't pushed the leaf away to kind of create a fresh space to draw another leaf in that Rosetta. So, in summary, focus on that milk texture, give it a good tap before you spin it, make sure you get rid of those big bubbles, and then keep that pour speed a little bit higher just to make some more space. And then you can focus on the rocking, keep it slow, keep it simple, but focus on that overall pour speed here. I think that's going to be what transforms things. The contrast, very good. There's quite a lot of foam here, and so this milk, if you want this much foam, I might be tempted to go for something like a heart rather than even a tulip here, just because it's pretty thick, foamy milk as a first point. Secondly, I would focus on making sure that it is really spun up together. It looks like it might have dried out a little bit, and you get those kind of blobbier pours that lack a bit of sharpness. So really, really, really spin that milk back together and that foam back together. Really gloss paint look before you start to pour. You can see a bit of beige in here, lacks a bit of contrast, so focus on keeping high a little bit longer and then coming in right at the end, very close, very quick for those kind of tulipy dollops, or a heart if that's what you want to pour too. You can see the foam's pretty good. The texture is nice. It's, you know, microfoam, that's right. But yeah, a little bit dry, I would say. And you can see the pour through, the sort of pull through at the end, definitely too close or too slow. Come up and that quick whip through just to sort of tie things neatly. You can see it's a pretty thick line going through the middle, and so these are the things I would want to focus on. So this one from Tom from Reddit, a couple of things to highlight here. You can see where a couple of big bubbles have popped. So again, pop those bubbles before you start to pour. Don't pour milk that has those big bubbles in it, because they will do this and it will ruin your hard work. So tap, 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 swirl, 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 pour. Secondly, this isn't a bad Rosetta. You can see some of the detail is gone in the beige. You can see you've been pouring from neither high nor close and kind of in the middle, and that means your work is kind of disappearing into the beigeness. So focus on starting high and coming close quickly as soon as you want to start to paint, as soon as you want to start to pour, and then it's going to be that kind of tick-tock motion, and trying not to pour so slowly that you're pouring leaves on top of each other. Where you get that kind of bunching and that lacking of separation as you see in the sort of middle of this, you're just not pouring quickly enough, or you're not moving sort of backwards at the end of the pour enough to kind of give some space to those leaves. So it's a kind of, you're pouring a little slow, a lot of wiggling happening at the end there. Slow down the wiggle, focus on that, but focus on that pour speed, overcoming that very human urge to not pour too fast, to not spill the milk. But that's the thing that will transform these. Contrast, pour height, and pour speed. It's so important. So I do want to talk about alternative milks, because they are a little bit challenging. We've got this pour from Kevin C. And you'll see a few things. Firstly, there's some bigger bubbles there. So go back all the way to sort of texturing, focusing on stretching as quickly as you can, as early as you can, and spending as long as you can in that rolling, churning phase to break down those bubbles as small as possible. They'll be just much easier to work with. And then you can see again the separations happening. You've got to work pretty quickly with sort of alternative milks because they lack the fat, so they tend to drain just that little bit faster. So as soon as you're done, tap, tap, swirl, 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 really get them sort of whipped back up. I know I keep saying it, but it's so, so important. And then you can start to pour and you'll get a bit more crispness in the milk that you're painting with, ultimately. Like it'll give a sharper edge to your brush. Here, everything's kind of drying out and sort of lacking contrast, lacking clarity. That's the thing I would focus on first, and then you can focus on sort of rocking a little bit slower or pouring a little bit faster. But there's some sort of texture to focus on first and foremost that will make life a little bit easier to refine the technique after that. So a couple of quick images coming from my Patreon-only Discord, because I did put a call out there as well. There's this one here. This is a classic example of just not quite enough air in the milk, and it becomes really quite difficult to pour with. It's almost too thin, too liquid. It doesn't flow the way that foamy milk does. And so you tend to find these very hard to control pours where, you know, it won't do the symmetry thing quite right, despite all your best efforts. You just need to incorporate a little bit more air into it and make sure it's really, really nicely combined before you pour. So I hope this was helpful. I hope I gave you a framework to think about your own pours and improve them, as well as some things to think about to build the technique to get the pours that you want to pour. Once you're nailing things like rosettas and tulips, you can move into more complex patterns like swans and other things if you want to, or just stay there. I feel like the act of pouring latte art for someone else is just a nice way to say, I care about this thing that I've made, and I want to show you that I've made this thing for you with care, or made it for yourself with care. And it will be delicious if you've made great espresso and you've steamed milk with great texture. And actually the pattern's just a nice little touch, but it isn't going to change the way it tastes unless you do something kind of weird, and don't do that. Anyway, now I'd love to hear from you. Has this been helpful if you watch this and you put it into practice? Have you been able to evolve how you are pouring latte art? I will make sure I link to other resources in the description. There's some great stuff out there for free on the internet. I would strongly recommend checking that out. Let me know your thoughts, let me know your feedback, let me know how you get on down in the comments below. But for now, I will say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.